It was the evening of the first Easter, but there was no joy and no celebration in the room where the followers of Jesus were gathered. They were followers who had run away from Jesus. They had let him down, and now they heard the report of Jesus' resurrection. But it was night, and it was dark, and it is so hard to believe in good news in the dark. So they were followers filled with fear, perhaps the most typical followers there are. And they handled their fear and their failure the way we still do today. They closed and locked the door and hid behind it. Have you ever failed at something, anything truly important to you? And if you have, did you do as the disciples did, close and bolt the door and hide behind it? I think most of us have at one time or another. We hide from the world when we feel we have failed, and we hide from the world when we are afraid. When I worked with the Victim Services Program in Alberta, I constantly saw women who were afraid and who would lock themselves behind closed doors. These were women who would try to hide the violently abusive situations they were living in. I realized quickly as I worked with these women that for many of them, their present fears, which often involved horrendous violence, were more bearable than a future of uncertainties and possible failure outside their locked doors. Self-esteem in these women was so low that they remained within the fear of their abusive relationships. This was less frightening for them than the possibility of beginning again on their own and of possibly failing in their attempts at establishing a new future outside their locked doors. The risk of opening the door and stepping out into a new future of uncertainties was overwhelming for them. Working with women who are abused has taught me that in spite of all our bolts and our bars and all the chains that lock us in, Jesus cannot be locked out. Jesus comes to us behind our locked doors. Jesus steps into our places of fear, failure, and uncertainty, and stands with us just as he did his early followers. The house, the doors, the locks that the writer of John's Gospel is speaking of today are more than a physical house with walls, doors on hinges, and deadbolts. They describe the interior condition of the disciples. The locked places of our lives are always more about what is going on inside of us than around us. What are the closed places of your lives? What keeps you locked behind closed doors? Maybe like the disciples, it is fear. Maybe it is questions, disbelief, or the conditions you place on your faith. Perhaps it is sorrow and loss. Maybe the wounds are so deep that it does not seem worth the risk to step outside. For some, it may be anger and resentment. And for others, it may be an unwillingness to open up to a new idea of God, humanity, and the world around us. Jesus enters these locked places of our lives. He steps into our closed lives, closed hearts, closed minds, offering us peace and breathing new life into us. He does not open the door for us, but he gives us all we need so that we might open our own doors to a new life and a new way of being. This is happening all the time. Jesus comes to us wherever we are. Jesus meets us in our fears, our failures, our uncertainties, and our sufferings. Jesus breathes new life into each and every one of us. No matter what we have done, no matter what has happened to us, no matter what we have suffered, Jesus comes bringing healing and new life. His presence makes the difference. He eases our fears and turns our failures from stumbling blocks into stepping stones. Peace be with you, Jesus said, and showed the disciples his hands and his side. Through Jesus, healing is bound up with pain and suffering. That is one of the paradoxes of our faith. We know through experience that it is the wounded who can heal us. Jesus comes to us then in the wounds of others. In Alcoholics Anonymous, it is those who have suffered that are able to show others the way to healing and recovery. It is also those who have gone through experiences of grief, despair, and hopelessness that know best how to bring words of comfort and healing. It is the wounded who can support us and who can help us find our way through grief and despair to the peace and joy that comes with healing. It is from those who have suffered the most that we learn most deeply about God's love, God's grace, and God's peace. Jesus shows up in all of our life circumstances, bringing peace. This gift of his presence is our resurrection reality. It is what he sends us out with as we unlock the doors of our lives and step out into his resurrection life. Resurrection life is not an idea to be grasped or a case to be proved. It is a life to be lived. It is the experience of God's love, of God's grace, and of God's presence as a gift to be shared. It is not something to have, not a possession to be stored, but a way of life. Each of us faces situations daily that need to hear the reality of God's love and God's presence. We are people who know we are loved by God and who know that we share in God's grace. This world desperately needs to know that same message. There are places where only we can bring the good news. If we do not share it, then God's love and God's presence will not be known. Every time we live in the power of the resurrection, we engage the world, one another, and our life in a new way. We move from saying, unless I see the nail holes in his hands and put my finger in those nail holes and stick my hand in his side, I won't believe, to saying, my Lord and my God. I do not know if Thomas put his finger in the mark of the nails or his hand in Jesus' side. John's gospel doesn't say, and for good reason. It doesn't really matter what Thomas did. That's not the issue. This story isn't about Thomas. It's about us. How will we live? What will we do? Have we come to a place of unlocking our doors and stepping out into resurrection life? The choice is always ours. All thanks be to God. Amen.